Boker Tov, Givrin.
Boker Tov.
Ma shlomcha, Gus. Tov meod. Wow, I like that. Ma shlomcha, Tom.
Tov.
I thought for a minute he was going to tell us. Raw. Okay, good. I'm glad you're all thinking and alert this morning. When we turn to, first of all, the vocabulary, we want to review that, recap the vocabulary for the vocab quiz on Tuesday morning. We have the vocabulary at the end of chapter 24 and the end of chapter 25 to review. So let's go over that, and as I pronounce the vocabulary words, please pronounce them after me. This is on page 148, the end of chapter 25. Sane.
Sane.
Sane means he hated. Now, when we talk about hate and love in the Old Testament, keep in mind it's not always talking about emotions. Sometimes it's talking about the concept of election or non-election, or selection and non-selection. But the word means he hated. And sane is used in the participle form to refer to enemies, literally haters or hating ones. So sane, he hated. Or means light. John, question?
Just on sane, because is that where it would be like Jacob have I hated?
Yes, it is the same word used. And Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated.
Should we still translate it hated, or is there a better word to use for that?
Well, it depends on how you want to do your translation. If you want to do it very literally, you'll keep hate, and then you'll have to explain its meaning. Or if you want to be dynamic, you'll say, Jacob I have chosen, Esau I have not chosen. Okay? The third word is saraf.
Saraf.
Saraf is he burned. It's the root word for seraphim. Seraphim being one of those angels or messengers of God that are literally burning ones. He burned. Sha'al.
Sha'al.
Sha'al means he asked. He asked. It precedes questions. Achot.
Achot.
Achot means sister. Notice it has a plural ending, a feminine plural ending, but it is singular. So whether it is singular or plural is determined by context. This is an irregular noun in that regard. But it's the easiest way to distinguish it from the word for brother. What's the word for brother? Ach. If we had third feminine singular, it'd be acha. And acha doesn't quite sound like sister. Might sound like someone is saying something about your sister. So it's instead of acha, it's achot. Okay, achot. Okay, the next is acher.
Acher.
Now please keep this straight from acher as opposed to acher. Acher is a preposition. Acher is accented on the first syllable, and it has a pathak under the haith. The one we're looking at now has a tsere under the haith, and it is the accented syllable, not the first. Acher means behind or after. Acher means another, another. And in Hebrew, there's no way of distinguishing between another of the same kind and another of a different kind. In Greek, you have that, the ability to distinguish between another of the same kind, another of a different kind. But in Hebrew, there's not. Acher means another, or it can refer just to other gods, for example, would be Elohim Acherim. All right? The next word is Javert.
Javert.
Javert means he shattered, he broke. Sha'er.
Sha'er.
Sha'er is he remained. He remained. It's when the noun is used for the word remnant from the same root. Aaron.
Aaron.
This is not the name Aaron. Okay? This means a chest or coffin, and it is used specifically of the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is a chest that is hollow, that has a lid on it, and into which things may be placed, like the scroll of the law, like the budding rod of Aaron, can all be placed inside that chest. And then it is has rings on it, and it can be, poles can be slid through those rings, and the priest can carry it. That's the Ark of the Covenant. But in the Hebrew, it's Aaron. So in some places, it would be consistent to translate it ark. But be careful you don't confuse that with the word for the ark that Noah entered and floated on the water in, because it's a different word entirely. So Aaron is chest or coffin. You could translate as ark, as long as you understand it's the Ark of the Covenant. Then the next word, notice, has no vowel pointings. It's because it is found only in what we call the eshtafal, because when you see it, it takes a sheen rather than a tau in a hithpael type of construction. And it is a verb that means he bowed down. And there is if I've given you the reference there for holiday, because in holiday, the older editions of holiday had it mislabeled and misfiled under a different root. And they had to make an addition and correction on that at later date. And that's why if you have an older edition of holiday, always check the back of books like that to see if there is a set of corrections and additions. My older copy has the corrections, additions in the back, and so I laboriously went through and copied by hand all of the additions and corrections back into the body of the lexicon so that I would have them and understand them. That was one of them. There was a huge change to make that was necessary. But now in the later editions, I think that has been corrected. It means he bowed down, he worshipped. He bowed down or he worshipped. The next word is bakor. Bakor is a noun. It means firstborn. Firstborn. It can be used of humans or animals. The next is behema. Behema is the singular. Behemoth is the plural. That's where we get our word behemoth. Behemoth comes from the plural of this. Behemoth, behemoth, is one of the animals that Job talked about in the latter chapters of Job. So behema is a brute, a beast. Normally it is a animal that is considered to be four-legged, a land animal. It's not used of whales, and it's not normally used of reptiles like crocodiles or anything like that. These are land animals that are four-legged variety. Some think that behemoth in Job is a reference to the hippopotamus. In Africa, they'll tell you that that's obvious. Then the person has never been to Africa and never seen a hippopotamus and doesn't know anything about them. So that is a misleading identification that's found in a large number of Western commentaries that are very ignorant of African animal life. And it has to be an animal very different from that. And many think, including myself, that it's a possibility that behemoth is actually one of the dinosaurs. Okay, then we come down to the last line, and again, I have not provided you with the pointing. It is normally found in the piel and hiphil and the causative stems, and this verb form with a sheen, cheth, tau, is he destroyed. This is related to another word that is a noun that means corruption or pit, and it is a segulate noun, accented on the first syllable, shachat. Shachat is a place of destruction. Shachat is the pit. Shachat is understood to be, when it's used of departed individuals, the departed dead, it is always used of the unbelieving. The believer never goes to Shachat in the Old Testament. He's never in danger of going to Shachat. If it's used of a believer in only a few cases, it would be then probably the concept of corruption in the grave where the body decays. But corruption, decay, and pit. But if it is pit, and by context clearly a place of departed spirits, it's a place of the unbelieving dead. The root, though, the verb root means he destroyed. Shakav. Shakav means he lay down, he reclined. Bakar. Bakar is a noun meaning cattle or herd. It can be used of a herd that involves more than cattle, cows, bovines. It can be used of a herd that includes camels. And then on page 154 at the end of chapter 25, the rest of our vocabulary, and of course you can see here we have sufficient vocabulary for the next quiz without adding any new words this time. And the first one again is just root without vowel pointings, the sheen, lamed, kaf, sofit. In the hifil means he cast or he threw. He cast or he threw. What you want to be careful here is not confusing it with the verb that is shalach. Shalach means to send. He sent. He sent. And if it's a hand that is sent, it means he reached. And this, it does not have the chayth. This one we're looking at has the final kaf. It's a different word. Similar sound, different word. I think we caught some of you on similar sound, different words on this last quiz. You have to watch out for that. All right, the next word over there on the left-hand side is door. Door is a noun referring to a generation of people, a generation of time. Door. It's spelled sometimes with a full holem wow and sometimes without the wow. That's why you have two spellings given for you there. Then on the right-hand side, sheret. Sheret is in the piel. The reason you don't have the hirik under the sheen is because the resh, as a guttural, rejected the doubling dogish. So the hirik was heightened to a tsere to compensate. It means he ministered. He ministered. Like the priest ministering in the temple or at the tabernacle in his offering of sacrifices. Then we have the root word that is not found in the Cal perfect third masculine singular in the Hebrew Bible. It would be pronounced shalam, but some insist on it being shalem because it appears to be a stative verb, and therefore there's some debate over that, but it means he was whole or he was complete. This is the root for the noun shalom. Shalom meaning peace or benefit, welfare. And then in the piel, notice below it, the same root has the meaning he made amends, he repaid, or he fulfilled a vow. He fulfilled a vow. So in the piel, it's the idea of bring into a state of completion, the factative. To bring into a state of completion in regard to he made amends is that there's a situation in which it needs to be corrected. So it's bringing the state into, it's bringing that situation into a state of being corrected, of making amends, of asking forgiveness, of restoring what had been taken or something of that nature. To repay the same way. He repaid is the idea of to bring that situation back into its former correct condition, to repay what was owed, what was borrowed, and also in the fulfilling of a vow, the same concept. It's to bring into a state of completion, to complete what is promised. That's why the PL is used in that way. And notice the PL is factative. Why? Because the cal is stative. We know that because of the use of the verb to be or a form of it in the translation. He was whole. Or in the lexicon, it would be whole, be complete. Okay? He was whole. He was complete. He is whole. He is complete. He will be whole. He will be complete. The helping verb there from be is what tells you that this in the cal then is a stative verb. And therefore, when it's used in the PL, it is a factative. It is a factative. All right, let's go to the bottom right-hand corner of the list. Mashak. Mashak doesn't mean my home. It means he seized, he carried off, he pulled. He seized, he carried off, he pulled. And then the left-hand column, the second word from the top, shafat. Shafat. Shafat means he judged. He judged. We get the word for judge from this. The noun, shofet, is just a cal active participle, masculine singular. We get the noun mishpat from it. Mishpat means judgment. So as we look at mishpat, we have a main prefix, and that is the noun formed from the root shin, pei, tate, and it means judgment. And you see that often in the Old Testament in the plural, mishpatim, the judgments of God, the judgments written by Moses. Any questions on the vocabulary, Greg?
Is that where the name Jehoshaphat?
Jehoshaphat comes from that. Jehoshaphat means Yahweh judges. Okay? And that's in the book of Joel, that's very important because the valley of Jehoshaphat is the valley where God judges. And that's how it got its name. All right? Anyone else? And by the way, in case you ever preach that text in Joel chapter 2, multitudes in the valley of decision, and that valley of decision is named Jehoshaphat, that's not decision for salvation. Don't use that text as a salvation message to preach the gospel. It's talking about judgment, irrevocable, irreversible, undeniable, unescapable judgment. It's not a time of salvation whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. The only way you can use that evangelistically is tell people there's a judgment coming. But the text doesn't tell about the salvation in that one place. So watch that very carefully. I hear so many preach that, saying the vow of decision, you need to make a decision. That's not what the decision was. Actually, that word decision there in that passage refers to the decision of the judge in pronouncing judgment. And the judgment, the decision that was rendered is execute immediately. All right? That's not a decision for salvation. Interesting that we get into some of those problems, but that's what happens when we fail to pay attention to context and read the text correctly. And we have you here to try to teach you not to do that. Now, before we go back to Genesis on translation and talk about it, there's one other thing I want us to take a look at, and that is to just remind you of some of the elements that are involved in the adding of pronominal suffixes onto the ends of verbs. We've had 2 chapters now, chapter 24 dealing with the suffix on the perfects, and chapter 25 dealing with the suffixes on the imperfects. And in each case, the suffixes perform the same duty. They are the direct objects of those verbs. And so when we see those suffixes, that's the way they are to be treated. And you notice on page 148 at the end of chapter 24, the keys to remember about the pronominal suffixes on the perfect verbs. Only active stems take verbal suffixes, with the exception of infinitive constructs. Infinitive constructs can take pronominal suffixes even if it is in a passive, like a nifal or a pual or a hafal. But normally, the perfects and imperfects are verbal suffixes are found only in the case of the active stems, like the cal, the pal, the hifil. Second, the verbal suffixes are those of the personal pronoun objects. They are direct objects of the verb. Direct objects, not the subjects. You see, that's why you can't have them on passive verbs, because the object of a passive verb is identical to the subject. And since a passive verb, if you have yikateo, for example, in the nifal, imperfect, third masculine singular, the subject is the object. He killed himself. You don't have to put a pronominal suffix on it to make it say he killed him. All right? It's already understood. He killed himself. You don't have to duplicate it. The subject is the object in the passive. So it is not added. Those pronominal suffixes are direct objects, and they're never identical to the subject of the verb. They are not one and the same. The third key is that the same keys of recognition apply. The PL still has a hirik under the first root letter, a dagesh in the second root letter. The hifil still has a hey prefix. In identifying the perfects, we still follow the same rules. Pay attention to the name of the stems and pay attention to the clues that those stems have. The nifal in the perfect begins with a noon. The hifil and hafal begin with a hey. The hithpael begins with a hith. And the pl and pual have a doubled middle radical of the root. All those remain. The pronominal suffixes do not change the key characteristics of the perfect forms of the verb. Those still remain. And then due to number 2, the idea that verbal suffixes are direct objects, The recognition of a verbal suffix is not difficult because as you look at the context, it becomes clear that that direct object must be there. And it becomes clear what it is. And of course, it is usually a different person in gender and number than the verb itself. Although there are times when you'll have he did something to him, and therefore both be third masculine singular. But many times they're different. And so it just takes a lot of practice to recognize these and to catch them. Remember, again, one of the huge clues that when we're talking about pronominal suffixes, whether it's on nouns or verbs, the kaf, whether it is the sophete, the final form, or whether it's a medial form, like in Kim, the kaf indicates a second person pronominal suffix. The kaf signifies a second person pronominal suffix. All second persons, both masculine and feminine, both single and plural, take a kaf in the form of that pronominal suffix. Then let's take a look at the keys for remembering the suffixes on the imperfect. On page 150 in the explanatory notes, it says when the regular verb ends in a vowel, then no helping vowel is needed, nor possible, because you can't put two vowels back to back. And then, number two, when a helping vowel is needed, it usually is a tsere. It usually is a tsere. And you'll see that in the forms. If you look on page 151, as you go down through those, Yishmareini. Notice the tsere under the resh. He keeps me. Yishmarka. Notice there's no connecting vowel needed, so it's just a schwa. He keeps you. Yishmarek. He keeps you. That's the you second feminine singular, pronominal suffix. Yishmarehu. Notice the tsere used as a connecting vowel. And notice that that's the third masculine singular pronominal suffix. He keeps him. Yishmareha. Here, instead of the tsere, there's a sigol. And that occurs on occasion, but is still an E-class vowel being used as the helper. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at it. As we've noted, the second feminine plural and the third feminine plural follow the more primitive form. So when you're looking at the plurals, you have to look at the use of yishmarein, third feminine plural suffix on the cal imperfect third masculine singular down there in the lower left-hand corner of the chart on 151. And the same with the third feminine, second feminine plural, yishmarken is utilized. And then notice occasionally the singular suffixes have a noon energic. And noon energic is just the idea of a working noon. A working noon. It doesn't mean an energized one that's dancing around on the page. It just means it's a working noon. And it's because if it's difficult to add a suffix sometimes that is a pure vowel, like the E suffix of first common singular. Therefore, you'll have yishmareni, and you'll have yishmareka is the second masculine singular. Notice there's no noon there. But you had to have it for the first common singular. When that noon is used that way, it normally has a dogish in it. That's the way you can identify it. Because there are some forms where you have a noon with a shurik as a suffix. Let me get a different pen here. You'll have a noon with a shurik as a suffix on a word, and you look at that, and what does that first remind you of? What? First common plural, right? The ending in the first common plural on the perfect, on the end of the verb. We killed, katalnu, right? So as you look at that, pay attention to the noon. If the noon does not have a dogish in it, it's more likely to be a perfect first common plural ending then. In other words, that's the ending of the verb. That's like a cal or a PL perfect third, or excuse me, first common plural. But if it has a dogish in it, that tells you that this is what we call the noon energic. It is a working noun used in order to help pronunciation. It's not part of the verb suffix. This is a pronominal suffix, third masculine singular. Instead of having the hey, you have the noun with a dogish in it. So whenever you see a word with a noun at the end, no matter whether it's this or whether it's me, as we were seeing it here in the text that we were looking at, whether it's this one, when it has the dogish in the middle, the bosom of the noun, and by the way, need to remind all of you, dogishes always go on the left side of letters, never on the right side. So the dogish on a noun is never found over here. It's always over here. A zayin, the dogish never goes over here, it goes over here. It's always inside or to the left. Hebrew reads from right to left, and it has to be either in the middle of the letter or it has to be in the left side of that letter, if it's a letter that takes up only the right side of the box. So keep that in mind. I noted a couple of those in one of your exercises that was done here recently, where you need to add a dogish with the article that you were adding or with other things. All right, the keys to remember on page 151. As with the perfect, the verbal suffixes are those of the personal pronoun objects. They are direct objects. Therefore, the same thing applies. They're on active stems, not passive stems. The same basic keys of recognition apply. You still know that the prefixes of the imperfects take certain vowels. And there are also other characteristics of various stems to watch for. And number 3, because the distinguishing characteristic of the imperfect stem is the prefix, the addition of pronominal suffixes does not significantly alter the form. Therefore, recognition of an imperfect with a verbal suffix is relatively simple. I say relatively because it will offer its challenges from time to time, but I think we can work through it without too much difficulty. There's also here the verbal suffixes for the imperative on page 152, for the infinitive construct on page 153. And we'll be coming back to the infinitive construct again a little bit later and talking about a couple of forms there. And I think that will pretty much carry us over for now on just making certain we're up to date on what we're covering here. Yes, Scott.
I've not seen a difference between the perfect and the imperfect, so I'm missing something. They seem
The
pretty
perfect and
similar.
imperfect are different verb forms.
Right, but the endings all look the same, so why are
They're
we-
not all the same.
They're not all the
There
same.
are a few that are different, so watch out for them. They're mostly the same, though. You're correct. They're mostly the same. So if you learn the suffixes for one, you've got most of them for the other. There's very few differences. Okay? All right, good observation. All right, any other questions on chapters 24 and 25 before we stop? Kelly?
The verbal suffixes with the infinitive construct,
Yes.
are they, I mean, I know always is a relative term, but always going to be translated like a participle? Is that just how it makes
No.
more sense?
It depends on whether that pronominal suffix is going to behave as the object or whether it's going to behave as the subject.
So if it's a subject, it can be like an infinitive?
It'd be like it'd be translated like a participle if it's the subject. Okay? Otherwise, it'd be like, here I have my keeping, your keeping. That's when it's the subject. When it's the object is to keep me, to keep you. All right? Tom?
You said whenever you see a word with a noun and a dogish,
Yes.
I didn't get the complete thought on that.
When it's at the end, when it's a suffix on the end of a word, when you have a noun, this is a helping noun. It's not this noun that is the ending of a perfect first common plural. Okay? It distinguishes between those two. All right, well, let's go back then to Genesis chapter 1. We left off with verse 4. Remember, we're doing this to try to get you into a translational mode of thinking, to give you the opportunity to work through a context, to let you see how to translate, to enable you to build vocabulary and experience, to help you in your encountering of strange things, and to give us some exercise in using the lexicon. Okay? We translated this last time. Then God saw the light, that it was good. Or it could be by context. So God saw the light, that it was good. Then God divided between the light and the darkness. The last thing I said was that in Hebrew, they say between by saying it twice. In English, we only use between once. So we translate this, then God divided between the light and the darkness. The Hebrew says, then God divided between the light and between the darkness. So in this case, you do not translate it super literally, because you would then have an oddity in your English grammar. It would not be smooth English. Verse 5. Then God named the light day. Now, let's read this in Hebrew, okay? Let's get you used to this, used to reading Hebrew and pronouncing it. I'll pronounce each word and you repeat after me. Vayikra. Elohim. Laor. Yom. Welahoshek. Kara. Layla. Wayehi erev. Wayehi voker. Yom echad. If you watch this as you're reading and as we're pronouncing it, it will give you that interaction between your eyes, your mouth, and your ears. Remember that the more senses that you can employ in learning a language, the better you will remember it. If you only hear it, you'll likely forget it by the time the hour's over. But if you can hear it, speak it, and see it all at the same time, you then are using more senses and it will stick with you longer. So when we're reading like this, read the Hebrew. Get used to looking at the Hebrew. Get used to pronouncing what is there. Because as we read it publicly this way, as a body, then that should help you in reading it privately. But if you're not looking at the Hebrew text when we do it, it doesn't help you in that way. So that's one of the reasons we read it out loud. Not only just to hear it, but to see and hear it. So you connect those senses together and they can become part of you. Vayikra, translated here as then God named. Elohim's obviously the subject. Then God named. Kara, which means he called, he named. We know it's named because anytime kara is followed by an object introduced by a lamed, it is normally then the meaning name. It's not that he called to the light as though he's shouting at the light. It is he named the light. Kara plus lamed means named. You see that in your lexicon as well. It will tell you. So God named the light because the comets under the lamed represents the article. The lamed normally takes a schwa. When the schwa has been taken away, we have to ask why. The comets is here instead of a pathak because the aleph is a guttural rejecting the doubling dogish that belongs with the hay of the article. The article is a hay with a pathak and a doubling dogish in the first letter of the word it's attached to. So the aleph refuses it, so the pathak is heightened in compensation to a comets. We saw that in the preceding verse where we have ha'or in the first line. Ha'or is the light. Down here we have la'or, the light. Okay? The lamed is not going to be translated because with kara it means named. Okay? With kara it means named. You don't translate in English, God named to the light. That's weird English. It's not proper English. He named the light. So the lamed is not translated. It's understood as part of kara, meaning name. John, question?
Yeah, I was going to ask about the lamed, because that kind of stuff, when we're doing homework and stuff, throws me off. You know, I get this lamed and I'm like, well, I don't want to translate it, but I want to show it's there.
And what you want to do is you want to take a look at your lexicon in such case. Even if you're familiar with the word, like if you know kara already, and if you're uncomfortable with that, and you say, you know, something about this, I'd like to translate that lamed, but how do I translate it? Well, what you do is refresh your memory by going back to the lexicon and seeing if it talks about the lamed and gives you any clues. And on page 323, when you look at the kal of kara, the very first meaning, kara le, call. Kara le, call. All right? But that's when it's call to. It's used with el, call unto, in Genesis 3:9. But it goes down further. Kara shem le, give a name to, Genesis 2:20. Kara le, call equals name. And you find out that name is one of the uses of the kara followed by a lamed. So therefore, you can feel comfortable about not translating the lamed, because that tells you its name. Now, one other thing to warn you about, Kenny asked me this earlier. He was showing me a translation that he had obtained by means of looking at one word that was in a phrase and seeing how it was translated in holiday, and did not look up the other word in the phrase to see how it was translated in holiday, and therefore end up with a translation that I questioned. And he showed me what he was looking at. And what he's looking at was in non-bold typeface. Non-bold typeface. As you have it here. You have give a name to, but you have call equals name in parenthesis, and the light day in parenthesis. Anything that is not in bold, you have to watch for and use with a grain of salt, because that which is in non-bold can be, it isn't always, but it can be extremely interpretive, and the editors have taken the freedom of translating the exact same phrase in the exact same verse two different ways in two different contexts. But the one they prefer will be in bold. The one they don't necessarily prefer will not be in bold. So there are seeming inconsistencies in the lexicon. And you'll see those on occasion. Kenny found one. And it does occur. And it occurs not only in Holliday's Concise, it occurs also in Kohler and Baumgartner in the Greater Lexicon, the HALOT. And so watch for that carefully. Okay, other questions? Yes, David?
So when trying to figure out how else you can translate these prepositions, where would you start looking? Would you start looking at the associated verb? Or
Yes,
okay.
always with the verb.
Okay.
Always with the verb. If you have a verb, always go there first. Okay? If you go to the preposition, you want to see what you'll get? Look under the lamed. Look at the lamed in Holiday. Pull it out there. Take a look at it. Starts on the bottom of page 167, and it continues clear over to page 169. That's a long article to read. And you'll notice that there are 25 different uses listed for the lamed preposition in that very long entry. 25. It includes 17 different translations. Not just 2 and 4, but many others as well. So if you're looking at the preposition, you're liable to be very frustrated and spend an inordinate amount of time. Always go to the verb first. Okay? And see what the entry says about that verb and its association with any prepositions. If that particular preposition is not listed in that entry of the verb as being associated with that verb, you're free to translate it pretty literally. But if it's given as an association, many prepositions are not translatable. And you do not translate because they are merely introducing the direct object of the verb. Okay? So begin with the verb. Okay? Welachoshek, and, literally, and to the night, or to the darkness, but we know that goes with kara, because here we have kara again following it. So, and the darkness, because the pathak under the lamed tells us that the article is there. Why isn't it heightened to compensate before the guttural that has rejected the doubling dogish? Because it's the strong guttural. Therefore, it's doubled by implication. And so the pathak remains. So, and the darkness he named Layla, night. Now, later we'll get back to this and talk more about it. But notice that the Wayik toll chain is broken here. And the reason is the writer does not want us to interpret these as two consecutive actions. The text clearly signals that we are not, that Moses does not intend to say here that God first named the light, then named the darkness. The grammar forces us to that. The grammar makes that certain. And all of the Hebrew grammars out there in print mention that. Many of them use this exact example, like Yyo Mare Elohim, using this exact example to demonstrate that. That this is considered simultaneous naming, not one after the other. So don't let me hear you preaching that God first named the light because it stands for justification, salvation, and righteousness, and the darkness is symbolic of evil, therefore it is second and does not have the same priority. Baloney. That's not what this text is saying at all, okay? Be very careful. Pay attention to Hebrew grammar, all right? The Hebrew grammar insists these are simultaneous namings, and there's no order here. It's not consecutive. There's not a sequence, and so the sequence is broken. The next thing that happens is Vayihi Erev. So it came to be evening, and it came to be morning. Notice I translated the second one as and. Because they're such a close pair, there's no necessity here to continue using the type of consecutive adverbs and conjunctions in translating that second part. So it came to be evening, and it came to be morning, day 1. Questions on verse 5? Vayihi, we had that, remember, way back at and it came and light came into existence. Vayihi or, and light came to be. It's that kal imperfect third masculine singular from haya. And it's a wayik tol. And the wayik tol here, you know it because the pathic under the wow. And there's no dogish in the yod because of the schwa. No dogish in the yod because of the schwa. Yes, Scott.
Just that translation again and the wow consecutives that are in there. And it came to be evening and it came to be morning.
So it came to be evening. So it came to be evening. And it came to be morning. What's your question?
Just you're not bringing out the then and so.
Right, because when you have, as I mentioned before, when you have two wayik tol verbs very close together, don't get in the trap of being overly woodenly literal and translating every one of them then, so. That's as bad as doing and. All right, when you've got two of them close together like that, they're obviously very closely associated, and there's no misunderstanding here about their being consecutive. Go ahead and use and with it. But I used and here. This is the only place so far I've used an and for a wayik tol in the first 5 verses.
It seems like there's a lot of exegetical significance alongside of the creation account with regards to that text.
Yes, there is.
And so,
Yeah. Okay.
Why is there a pay at the end of the
The pay, good question, Roger. Good observation. The pay at the end of the verse is the Masorete's way of noting a section. It stands for pateach. It stands for an open section, an open paragraph. And if you watch for that in the Hebrew text, it will help you decide paragraph divisions, section divisions in the text. Some have a samach, which is closed, and some have a pathak, or a pay rather, a pay, that means an open. And what that means is there's to be an open space there before the next verse, even if it's done in continuous writing. So it's to indicate that they see a section marker here. And it comes very logically at the end of the account of day 1. You'll have another one at the end of day 2, etc. Okay? All right, let's go to verse 6 then. Please read after me. I'll start reading several words at a time, but I'll keep it slow, and I won't read too big of a word or section at a time. Yyo Mare Elohim.
Yyo Mare Elohim.
What does that mean? Then God said. All right? Remember, Amar is he said. Amar, he said. Elohim, God. Yyo Mare Elohim. So God said, then God said, thus God said, therefore God said. This should be a phraseology that you will know by sight no matter where you see it. This occurs thousands of times in the Old Testament. Thousands. Men, if you don't know these words, someone's going to tell you don't know Hebrew. All right? Because this is repeated thousands of times. Yyo Mare Elohim. Then God said, Yehi Rakia.
Yehi Rakia.
Yehi means what? Let come into being. The Jasiv. Like Yehi Or. Let light come into being. Rakia is the word that means expanse. It's talking about the sky or the dome of the sky above. And it comes from a verb root that means to hammer out, to spread out, as to hammer out gold and spread it out in thin sheets. And the expanse is that which is spread out above. Has nothing to do with being a solid object. So many translate this as firmament, from the Latin Vulgate's translation, firmamentum. And so they talk about how the ancient Hebrews had a primitive, erroneous view of the world, that there was this dome above that had a solid ceiling to it. No such thing. All this is doing is saying it's spread out. And it is spread out. Look up. The sky is spread out from horizon to horizon. The stars at night are spread from horizon to horizon. It's stretched out. It's spread out overhead. That's all that rakia means. Has nothing to do with anything solid, nothing to do here with the Hebrews having some sort of primitive concept of the heavens and the earth and of the sky above. It always amuses me that everyone wants to take the lowest common denominator in evolutionary advancement of mankind in their evolutionary humanistic theory and attribute it to any ancient people, but especially to those of the Hebrew Bible, because they'll even accuse them of things that are more pagan and more primitive than they'll accuse contemporary Babylonians, Egyptians, Chinese, or Indians of. You know? They have an extreme prejudice against the Bible on its record. This is not a firmament, a solid dome. This is an expanse, a spread out. Betok hamayim. Between or in the midst of the waters. And here I would say in the midst of the waters is probably the best way for the time being. We'll have between in the second line. Wihi. Wihi mavdil means and let there be a division. Let there be a dividing. Mavdil is the Hifil participle masculine singular from badal. You know it's Hifil because of pathek under the main prefix of the participle and the hirikiot infix. Bein mayim lamayim. Bein mayim lamayim. Again. Between the waters, literally to the waters. All right? Between the waters, to the waters. How do you handle that one in smooth English? Well, you basically can just translate it just as between the waters. Because the reason for to the waters is for the Hebrew to go on and with a superfluous phraseology make certain the direction is clear. Hebrew is very direction oriented. Very direction oriented. And if there's going to be any doubt or any question, they will go on to make an extra statement to bring that out. And so if there's any doubt about there being two collections of water, one above the expanse and one below the expanse, here it is made abundantly clear. Between the water, to the water. Okay? Any questions here before we take a break?
Could you repeat that first part of the verse?
Wihi mavdil. And let a division occur. Let a division happen. Let it become divided. Yes?
The word rakia.
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 Everyone pronounce that. Rakia. Remember the pathak furtive at the end there. Okay? Go ahead, John.
Is that definite? Just because it says let go or let the
Yeah, remember, yes, remember what we said earlier about new sections, new contexts? Remember we had a pay at the end of verse 5 indicating the end of a section? We begun a new section, new context, and many times the key nouns will be definite but not have the article. And then after that we'll take the article. Same rule applies here as it did back in verse 2 and verse 3.
And And then also just more theologically, the idea of there being like a firmament or at least a hard, icy shell around the earth, did it come from a misunderstanding of firmament from that?
It has come from misunderstanding of the Vulgate translation of this Hebrew word.
Okay.
Yes.
Usually it's talking about like when the flood and the heavens were broken up and...
Right. No. No, don't take it that way. All right? Avoid that. Okay? All right? Let's take a break. We were discussing Genesis 1:6, and I'll translate that one more time. Then God said, "Let the expanse come into existence in the midst of the water, and let a division occur between the waters." Okay? Yes, Scott.
Yeah, on a question on the form we were talking about on the second yaass.
The wehi?
The wehi, excuse
No,
me.
it's not wayi. It's not a wayi tol.
Exactly. And how come the schwa isn't existing below the yod?
Okay, remember the rule we had before with the connecting of the vowel conjunction? If you have a vowel conjunction, normally it has a schwa, and let's say we have Yerushalayim as the word. When we had that situation, what's the rule? Anyone? Two schwas cannot stand together at the beginning of the word. So what happens? The first one changes to a hirik. If that changes to a hirik, and this is a yod, there's no reason to maintain this schwa. And so many times that, if it's a yod, especially if it's a yod, that schwa under the yod will disappear.
Because it's not pronounced is why
Because it's not really being pronounced. It's a silent schwa, so just get it out of the way and let it be a hirik yod. Remember, go back again to your conjunctions, and in the first chapters of your grammar, and go through. There were several examples given of that type of thing. Okay? Remember, we also had the same type of thing when we were looking at Elohim, and when we were adding to Elohim. And as we look at this, you say, okay, now how do I put a conjunction on here? Here again, two schwas cannot stand together back to back at the front of a word. And this is a compound schwa, but it's still a schwa. So what do we do with it? Well, normally, the normal rule is to say, give this the corresponding short vowel. But this aleph basically is a very silent letter. So what the Hebrew does, in the Hebrew mind, on Elohim, they said, let's get this out of the way then, let's clean it up. And to compensate for that missing compound schwa, let's heighten this to a tseri, and we had way lohim as the rule. So this is following the same type of rules. Yes, James?
Can you repeat the translation one more time?
Sure. Then God said, let the expanse, or you could translate let an expanse, either one would be correct, come to be in the midst of the water. And you could say that plural too, in the midst of the waters. And let a division come to be between the waters. Okay? All right. Let's go to verse 7. What do we know about yaass? Okay, it's a wayik tol. Everyone should have said that in unison at the very start. Okay, what do we see here? Okay, and what is a wayik tol? Is it a verb or is it a noun? Is it an adjective? What is it? It's a verb. All right. Now, what are the root letters that you see? Only two. What are they? Ayin and Sin. So there's one missing. Does that even look remotely familiar to you for any vocabulary word? What word is it? Asa. So when you look this up in the lexicon, add the hey to the end of it, look it up, and see if you see this form there. And if you do, then you know you chose rightly. Okay, but remember, we've said that before. Aleph and hey at the ends of Hebrew roots often disappear. And sometimes the hey becomes a yod or becomes a tau. Okay? So this is a cal imperfect, third masculine singular. It's a Wayik Tol form. It's from Asa. And Elohim is the subject. So God made. So God made Eth Harakia, the firmament. Eth here is not the preposition with. It is the sign of the direct object. It's talking about what he made. He made the expanse. Thus God made the expanse. Then he divided Wayavdale. Notice the pathak under the yod prefix of the verb. That tells you it's a hiphil imperfect. The tsere under the daleth, instead of having a hirik yod, is because hiphil verbs, when possible, will shorten the hirik yod infix to a tsere in the wow consecutive forms, the Wayik Tol forms. Okay? But it's still the I and E class vowel there. So it's a hiphil imperfect, third masculine singular, from Badal. Then he divided Bein Hamayim Esher Mitachath La Rakia, between the waters which were beneath the expanse. Mitachath literally is from beneath. From beneath. From under. And it's normally just translated under. And La Rakia is literally to the expanse. But if we say which were from beneath to the expanse, this is that Hebrew way of speaking where you use superfluous terminology. You have many words being used to try to express one concept because of their careful concern for direction. And in direction, they often speak of something to the face of or to something. But in most English situations, we would not say that. So here it's which were under the expanse. Now, where do we get the were from? That is by context, that we understand it's past tense. This has already occurred. But when we have a relative clauses normally require the use of a helping verb, or they have a verb of their own. And so this we have to add that verb for ourselves. It's part of the grammar, which were under the expanse. And uvein hamayim, and between the waters, esher me'al la rakia. Here's the exact opposite. Literally, which from, upon, to the expanse. That's the literal part. Me'al and lamed after it is just going to be translated as above, which were above the expanse. Now again here we have two bains, between the waters which were beneath the expanse and between the waters which were above the expanse. We don't translate two betweens in English, so the second one we're going to drop. So our translation will be here, then he divided between the waters which were below or under the expanse and the waters which were above the expanse. Okay, let me give that again. Then he divided between the waters which were below the expanse and the waters which were above the expanse. And then the last phrase is Wayehi Kain, a Wayik Tol, and it came about. Literally, Kain means thus or so. And Kohler and Baumgartner will tell you it means just so. Just like that. When I was a kid, one of the favorite TV programs on our black and white television with its round screen on it was You Were There. And they reconstructed events in history and they made us feel like we were there watching those events taking place. This Wayehi Kain is the author's way of saying, and it happened just like I've said. It happened just this way. It is very emphatic. It is super emphatic, and it's going to be repeated over and over again in this context. It is the way the author, Moses, is sending us the signal that what he is writing is absolute truth. This is exactly what happened, is what he's saying. Okay? His revelation is so certain, coming directly from God, obviously, because no man was present when this took place. This can only be by revelation from God. And that revelation is so certain that he adds to this under the superintending work of the Holy Spirit, and it happened just that way. That's what Yahikain means. Yes, John?
Would you translate that in English like with a separate sentence with an explanation? Or?
You could, yes. So it happened just that way. Okay. Kelly, question?
Well, I think I was thinking about, but we're on day 2 right now, right?
We are on day 2.
And the pays are kind of marking the days.
Yes, they often mark the days. Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions? Scott?
The revia above the Yyo Mare, what's the function there? What's it?
It's topical. It's topical. It is marking the key topic. It's telling us that the rest of this verse is dealing with division, dealing with separation. Okay?
So that revia can function in a lot of ways in the sentence.
It has 4 different functions, the revia does. Most of those are given, at least 3 of them are given for you in section 4 at the end of Hebrew Bible Insert. Gus?
From the grammar here, can you tell if there's a 24-hour day already? Or?
From the grammar so far, the only clue is that you have evening and morning being talked about. And so it's at least the equivalent of a solar day, but you couldn't say 24 specific hours. Well, it was 23, or what was 25? And then you also have the questions of physics. How far in physics can you go in a fluctuation of day and night, or the revolving of the earth at a certain speed before you have a problem that multiplies, so you have to have multiple miracles to hold it all together? Those things we can't deal with yet here. Okay? All right. Now, several things have occurred in all these directions. Take your hands, both hands, put them out in front of you over the table. All right? Repeat after me. Al.
Al.
May-al.
May-al.
May-al la table.
May-al la table.
What does al mean? Upon or above. Above. Now, here I cannot say may-al. Why can't I say may-al? Because may-al is from upon. So it's from, which means above. May-al is above. Al can be upon. All right? So this is may-al. Everyone?
May-al.
Al.
Al.
Now this can also be al, but may-al can only be this. May-al and al. All right? Go under the table. All right? Tachat.
Tachat.
Mittachat.
Mittachat.
All right? Now, if you touch the bottom of the table, it can be tachat. But it cannot be mittachat. To be mittachat, it has to be below. There has to be space. All right? So remove them to where there's space. Mittachat. Mittachat la table.
Mittachat la table.
You see? All right? Now, what if you put your hands over at the side of the table, wherever you're at, or put it beside a person or whatever? You have something that's beside, okay? That's 8 cell.
8 cell.
All right? And then if you have them behind the table, that is achar.
Achar.
Put them in front. Lifnei.
Lifnei.
Again, lifnei.
Lifnei.
What's behind? Achar. Try to keep those in mind. When we're dealing with prepositions, remember the handout I gave you with the mice and the cheese and everything? Those are the type of things that you've got to deal with and you've got to work at. When you take your hand and you move it away from something, that is min. From. Min. Everyone do it. Min. You can do it this way too. Min. All right? That's from. But if it's coming to, that's L. Everyone? L. L. L is to, unto, you see. All right? And it can also be the lamed preposition, can be to, but remember, lamed preposition has far more usages than L does. Okay? And remember, L to is not al upon. All right? El to, al upon. They're spelled differently, they're pronounced differently. El has a segol and an aleph. Al has an ayin and a pathak. All right? Try to get those things in mind. Try to picture the prepositions and try to get the positionings and practice those. Go home, and if you have children, teach them the same thing. But then they'll drive their mother crazy when they use them on her when you're not present to interpret. So be careful. Give them some training about what not to do with that knowledge. Okay? All right, let's go to verse 8. Vayikra Elohim. La rakia shamayim. Vayihi erev. Vayihi voker. Yom sheni. Now you already have seen this before. What's Vayikra Elohim mean? And it's followed by a lamed, la rakia. What does it mean? So God named the expanse, rakia, shamayim. What's shamayim mean? Heavens. Why isn't there a pathak under the meme? Why has the pathak under the meme become a comments? Because it's in pause. The athnak is there. Okay? Major pauses in the verse, like athnak and the sof pasuk at the end with the saluk. That's where you have that type change take place. So a pathak becomes a comments. All right? So God named, or then God named the expanse heaven, or heavens. So it came to be evening, and it came to be morning, a second day. Here we've changed from the cardinal letter, day 1, or cardinal number, to the ordinal number, second day. This tells us now that we have consecutive days because now ordinal numbers are being used. It's first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, etc. It started with day 1, a cardinal number, but all the rest of them are going to be ordinal numbers. So we have a sequence of days. We have an orderly narrative that is sequential. We already know that because the Wayik Tol verbs that begin every day and close every day. Verse 9, Yyo Mare Elohim. Everyone?
Yyo Mare Elohim.
Yikawu.
Yikawu.
All right, if you were in Dr. Grisanti's class, he prefers to use modern Hebrew pronunciation instead of biblical Hebrew pronunciation, and he will use Yikavu. So everyone? Yikavu. Now you see, this is another matter of diplomacy and learning, and it's good for your education. You'll learn this when you're in a church as well, that when you're with certain people, you pronounce words certain ways, or you say things certain ways. With the other people, you speak them a different way because you accommodate yourself to the company that you keep. If you take a class from Dr. Grisanti, you pronounce the wow when it is a consonant as a V because he uses the Germanic pronunciation out of Central Europe, out of the Jewish community there that is modern Hebrew, still being used today in Israel, and it's not according to biblical Hebrew pronunciation. We have a different philosophy. He wants to use that. I prefer to use biblical Hebrew because I'm teaching you biblical Hebrew and it helps you to better understand how biblical Hebrew behaves. But that's his choice. And you'll find other professors have the same differences. There's nothing earth-shattering, and there's not a mountain there or a hill to die on. And it's nothing greatly theological in nature. We have the same theology, all right? It's just a difference in choice and preference. So learn to adapt that way and realize this would be Yikavu for him, where we say Yikawu. All right? Hamayim. Mitachath hashamayim.
Mitachath hashamayim.
El makom echad.
El makom echad.
Watera'eh.
Watera'eh.
Hayavasha.
Hayavasha.
Vayehi Cain.
Vayehi Cain.
Yyo Mare Elohim means what? Then God said, or so God said. Here I would take it. Then God said, Yikawu hamayim mitachath hashamayim. Let, we know this by context. This is what he said. Notice the rabia above Elohim. The rabia is a major disjunctive accent. That's one of its 4 uses. It's not always disjunctive. It's sometimes topical, as Scott asked earlier about a preceding verse. Here it is disjunctive. Therefore, what comes after it is what God said. And in translation, you'll put that in double quotes in English, because in English we put what is said in double quotes so we can see what it is and know what it is. And because it's what God said, we know he's commanding things into existence. So we know that yikawu is a jussive verb. As an imperfect is a jussive. We know because the yod prefix, it is an imperfect, therefore it cannot be an imperative. So therefore it's a jussive. What else do you see on this verb that we recognize? The ending. Tell us about the ending, Gus.
It's a,
Go ahead. You're right. Just say it.
it's a, I don't know.
You've got the right thing noted there. What about the ending? Someone else. It's a plural. The shurik indicates a plural. The shurik indicates a plural. Okay, what else about this verb? We have a nifal triangle. A hirik under the prefix, a dogish in the next letter, and a comets under it. That's your nifal triangle. So therefore we know this is what? Nifal, imperfect, because it has yod prefix. What else? Third, masculine, plural. Remember, the third common plural is only in the perfect. All right? But you have second and third, or excuse me, you have masculine and feminine third person plural in the imperfect, whereas you have just the common in the perfect. And so we know then this is a nifal imperfect, third masculine plural, and that in addition it's jussive by context, not by form, just by context. What else do we know about this verb? When you parse a verb and you go through and you've given everything this point, nifal, imperfect, third masculine plural, jussive, what's left to say? The root. What do you know about the root here? Only 2 letters are showing, the kof and the wow. And that wow is behaving as a consonant, so it's going to stay a consonant. It's not a middle vowel verb. It's not going to turn into a shurik. It's not going to turn into a hirik yod. All right? It's not going to turn into a holem wow. So what's the best guess? A hey at the end is missing. And it proves to be true. It proves to be true. It's from kawa. Kof, wow, hey. All right? So let the waters be collected. Kawa means to collect. Let the waters, hamayim, be collected. What waters? The waters mitachath, from under hashemayim. In other words, under the heaven. Let the waters under the heaven be gathered el makom echad. Unto. Makom is the noun place. You just look it up just as it's spelled in your holiday lexicon and you'll find it there. It's from the root for this noun is kum, to stand. But it takes a meme comets prefix on it. Meme comets prefixes are very common for places. And so here's the word for place, and it becomes makom, el makom, unto one place, echad. All right? Reteira'eh. All right? Here we have a wow conjunction. This is not a wayik tol. Therefore, it tells us that the sequence has been broken, and therefore, this is simultaneous action with the preceding. It's not to be considered as 2 separate actions or sequential actions. It's looked at as simultaneous. At the same time that the waters are gathering into one place, hayabashah, the dry land, is appearing. Literally, being seen. Being seen. Teira'eh. Take a look at it. What can you tell me about this verb? Anyone who has the first clue on this verb?
The suffix?
Does it have a suffix? No.
Oh, it has a prefix.
It has a prefix. Kyle's right, it's got a prefix, the tau prefix. What's the tau prefix tell you? It's an imperfect. All right, that's the first thing. What else does it tell you? With a tau prefix and no suffix, what are the two possible parsings? Third, masculine, singular, and, or, excuse me, not third masculine singular, third feminine singular. Third feminine singular and second masculine singular. All right? Which is it going to be here? Is it second masculine singular or is it third feminine singular? Third feminine singular. All right? Because there's no you here, right? There's no command here to you. I don't remember that in the creation account. All right? But we have a noun, hayabasha. How does that noun end? Comets hey, a normal feminine ending. So dry land is feminine. So it is the subject. But let's go back to it a minute here. Why do we have a together here? What's going on here? We haven't talked about the stem. What stem of the verb is this? First of all, what do you see about this root that will cause you to be cautious? Three gutturals. Resh, aleph, and hey. So you know that you can be in for trouble. So the first thing you do is you look at this and you say, okay, tsere, under an imperfect prefix. Well, the hifil and hafal have A-class vowels. They're ruled out. The hithpael has another taith, or tau, so it's ruled out. The pl and pual, oh, what do I do? The second middle letter there is an aleph. It's going to reject doubling. Could it be pl? It's not going to be pual because pual has a U-class vowel. So I've got pl. It's not going to be cal. So I've got cal and nifal. Now, our pl and nifal. We've boiled it down to pl and nifal. Which is it going to be? Why? But what's the vowel under the pl prefix? Pl and pual have a vowel under the prefix that is normally what? Anyone? Schwa. Thank you, Kempis. Schwa. There's no schwa. Oh, a dogish rejected in the resh will take a hirik under the prefix and change it to a tsere to compensate for that rejection, right? So the hirik that used to be there, the hirik would tell you that it has to be cal or nifal. This isn't a cal, obviously, so it has to be nifal. You have the nifal triangle because you have the tsere, which is the heightened hirik because of the rejection of the dogish, and you have the comets under the resh. It's a nifal. And that's why we translate it as a passive. And let the dry land become visible. Let it be seen. Let it be seen. Or another way to say it, let it appear. And let it appear. So we have a gathering here. Let the waters beneath the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear, or literally be seen. And it happened just that way. John.
Could you, because it's supposed to be happening consecutively, could you use the first...
Supposed to be happening consecutively?
Well, didn't you say it, I'm sorry, yeah, at the same time.
Which is contemporaneous, which is the same time, simultaneously.
Okay. So could you just, in English, let first let that govern both, and then put wall,
oh, sure, you could.
Dry land appear?
Yeah, you could say, let the water beneath the heaven be gathered into one place, and the dry land appear.
Or could you put wall the dry land appear? So
I wouldn't use while, no. I wouldn't do that. It's two different commands here being given, and so I'd be careful.
Show that it's happening at the same...
No, you just have to understand that. Yeah. Okay? All right? Any other questions here? Notice how the rules of the guttural keep coming up again and again. And the nifal triangle is still there.